The rolling hills of Calhoun County, Georgia, concealed more than just cotton in the summer of 1864. Beneath the pristine white blooms that stretched across the Whitaker estate lay secrets as dark as the soil that nurtured them. While the Civil War raged just counties away, another kind of battle was being fought in silence at this remote plantation, one that would never make it into history books, but would haunt the land for generations to come. Records from the county clerk's office state that 36 laborers vanished from the Whitaker estate between March and August of 1864. Not a single one was ever officially accounted for. What's more disturbing is that no investigation was ever formally conducted. The pages documenting these disappearances were sealed by court order in 1867, only to be discovered in a forgotten archive room nearly a century later. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age, was found hidden inside a false bottom of a medicine cabinet during the estate's demolition in 1952. Inside were meticulous entries detailing experimental treatments and behavioral adjustments, all written in the steady hand of Dr. Elias Whitaker, the plantation's owner. The journal was promptly confiscated by local authorities and kept from public view until a Freedom of Information request in 2018 finally brought it to light. Do you have the courage to learn what happened on those fertile Georgian fields? What you're about to discover isn't a tale of supernatural phenomena or religious fanaticism. It's something far more insidious: the calculated application of emerging science divorced from all moral restraint. The Whitaker estate stood just 12 miles from the nearest town of Arlington, surrounded by thick pine forests that muffled any sounds that might escape its boundaries. The main house was a grand Greek Revival structure, with imposing white columns supporting a veranda that wrapped around all four sides, allowing a commanding view of the cotton fields that spread out in every direction. A series of smaller buildings dotted the property: the overseer's quarters, storage barns, and the worker cabins arranged in neat rows behind the primary residence. Dr. Elias Whitaker had inherited the plantation from his father in 1859, returning from Philadelphia, where he had been studying medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He brought with him not only formal medical training, but also controversial ideas about human physiology and behavior that even his northern colleagues found disquieting. His wife, Caroline, a delicate woman with family connections to wealthy industrialists in Boston, appeared perpetually uncomfortable in her southern surroundings, keeping to herself and rarely engaging with the plantation's daily operations. Unlike his neighbors who managed similar estates, Dr. Whitaker took an unusual interest in what he called the optimal functioning of his laborers. He instituted strict regimens governing their sleep, nutrition, and work patterns. At first, this was perceived by visiting planters as merely the eccentricity of a man with medical pretensions. Some even mockingly referred to him as the doctor behind his back, finding his scientific approach to plantation management pretentious. The social climate of wartime Georgia provided the perfect cover for Whitaker's escalating experimentation. With Confederate resources stretched thin and most able-bodied white men conscripted into military service, rural plantations operated with minimal oversight. Medical supplies were scarce for Confederate troops, yet somehow the Whitaker estate maintained a well-stocked infirmary, receiving mysterious shipments from northern contacts despite the Union blockade. Dr. Whitaker believes the Negro brain responds differently to pain and fatigue, wrote Reverend Thomas Holloway in a letter to his diocese. He speaks of conditioning them for greater efficiency through methods I dare not describe in this correspondence. I have expressed my concerns, but as a man of science, he dismisses my moral objections as religious sentimentality. The first person to notice something truly amiss was 12-year-old Samuel Mercer, the son of a tenant farmer whose small plot bordered the eastern edge of the Whitaker property. While hunting for rabbits one dawn in early spring, he witnessed something that would plague his dreams for years to come. "I saw them walking in a line," he later told his father. About 7 or 8 of them, moving like they was sleepwalking. Mr. Fletcher was leading them toward that old tobacco drying shed that nobody uses anymore. They wasn't chained or nothing, but they wasn't running either. Their eyes were open, but looked empty. And they all had the same mark on their necks, like a small burn or something. His father, Jacob Mercer, dismissed the boy's account as childish imagination, particularly given the implausibility of unrestrained laborers simply following orders with no supervision in the pre-dawn hours. "Boy's been reading too many of them penny dreadfuls," he told his wife. "Next, he'll be seeing ghosts and goblins in the cornfield." But Samuel couldn't forget what he'd seen, especially the vacant expressions on their faces. He began watching the Whitaker property from the edge of his father's land, documenting his observations in a small pocket notebook his schoolteacher had given him. He noted unusual patterns. Certain laborers would disappear from the fields for days, then return to work exhibiting radically different behavior, subdued, mechanical, and strangely compliant. Most disturbing was the case of Isaiah, a laborer known throughout the county for his imposing physical strength and equally powerful singing voice that would carry across the fields. Samuel had often heard Isaiah leading others in work songs that made the brutal labor of cotton picking somewhat more bearable. After vanishing for nearly a week, Isaiah returned to the fields, but the songs had stopped. When Samuel managed to observe him up close at the property line, he noticed that Isaiah's eyes had a peculiar glassiness, and he moved with stiff, measured steps like a clockwork figure. "Something's happened to Isaiah," Samuel confided to his mother one evening. "It's like he's not really there anymore." His mother, a superstitious woman, crossed herself and whispered about soul-stealing, but warned her son to stay away from the Whitaker property. "Nothing good comes from meddling in other folks' business," she cautioned, "especially not these days and especially not with the Whitakers." But curiosity proved too powerful for young Samuel. One night in late April, he crept onto the Whitaker property, determined to investigate the tobacco shed he'd seen that morning. As he approached, the unmistakable sounds of moaning drifted through cracks in the wooden structure. Peering through a gap between warped boards, what he witnessed sent him running home in terror, a sight so disturbing he couldn't speak of it for days. When he finally broke his silence, his father decided it was time to alert Sheriff Williams. But in a county where the Whitaker family had held influence for generations, and in the chaos of a nation torn by civil war, the sheriff was reluctant to investigate based solely on a child's testimony. "I've got Confederate deserters to track down and Union spies to worry about," the sheriff told Jacob Mercer. "I can't go poking around a respected doctor's property because your boy saw something strange in the dark. These are strange times, Mr. Mercer. We're all seeing things we wish we hadn't." Word of Samuel's allegations eventually reached the overseer of the Whitaker plantation, Mr. Fletcher, a gaunt man with cold eyes who appeared at the Mercer farm the following Sunday afternoon. "Dr. Whitaker is concerned about rumors being spread by your son," Fletcher said with unnerving calmness. "Such talk could incite unrest among the workers. In these dangerous times, we all need to be careful about the stories we tell. And who we tell them to." The threat lingered in the air long after Fletcher had departed the Mercer farm. Jacob forbade Samuel from venturing anywhere near the Whitaker property again, but the boy couldn't shake what he had witnessed. In the tobacco shed, he had seen 3 laborers strapped to wooden tables, their eyes wide open but unresponsive, while Dr. Whitaker methodically made incisions at the base of their skulls. Fletcher had been assisting, handing instruments to the doctor while monitoring the strange apparatus connected to the prone figures. Glass tubes filled with murky liquids that dripped steadily into their veins. As spring yielded to summer, more disappearances occurred. What was most perplexing to the few who dared notice was not just who vanished, but who returned. Some laborers would disappear for days, then reappear with dramatically altered demeanors. Others simply never returned, their absence explained away as transfers to other properties or escape attempts. Martha Whitaker, the doctor's 17-year-old niece who had come to stay at the estate after her parents' death in Richmond, began to notice troubling patterns during her first month at the plantation in June. Unlike her Aunt Caroline, who remained sequestered in her quarters with frequent nerve treatments administered by her husband, Martha was observant and inquisitive. "The women working in the house speak differently now," she wrote in her private diary. "Bessie, who used to hum while folding linens and would tell me stories of her childhood when we were alone, now responds only with 'yes, miss' or 'no, miss.' Her eyes never meet mine. When I touched her shoulder yesterday, she flinched as though struck by lightning, then immediately apologized in that same hollow voice. And there's a small, precise scar behind her right ear, partially hidden by her headscarf." Martha's suspicions grew when she overheard a late-night conversation between her uncle and a visitor, a Dr. Heinrich Vogel, whose German accent was thick and whose scientific credentials from Vienna were apparently impressive enough to earn Elias Whitaker's respect. Their discussion centered around conditioning thresholds and permanent behavioral modification. "The procedure is showing remarkable success," Whitaker told his colleague. "Subject 27 has maintained optimal compliance for 32 days with no signs of resistance resurgence. The removal of the specific portion of the cerebrum appears to eliminate defiance while preserving motor function." "And cognitive abilities?" Vogel inquired. "Diminished but sufficient for labor requirements," Whitaker replied. "The subjects can follow multi-step instructions, but show no capacity for independent thought or resistance. Exactly what's needed." Martha's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. Her uncle wasn't merely treating illnesses as he claimed. He was systematically altering people, removing parts of their brains to create compliant workers. The infirmary she had been forbidden to enter was no place of healing but a chamber of horrors. Unlike Samuel Mercer, Martha had the advantage of being family, with access to areas of the estate others couldn't reach. She began secretly documenting everything she observed, the patterns of who disappeared, the changes in those who returned, the strange deliveries that arrived under cover of darkness, the mysterious visitors with medical backgrounds. Using her status as the doctor's niece, she gained limited access to her uncle's library, where medical texts with disturbing annotations lined the shelves. One volume on neuroanatomy contained detailed notes on the seat of resistance in the human brain and techniques for its neutralization. Another journal, written in her uncle's precise handwriting, documented experimental procedures performed on subjects identified only by numbers, with clinical descriptions of their responses and behaviors following surgical interventions. Martha's methodical investigation was interrupted when she discovered her name in her uncle's journal, listed as Subject 41, pending evaluation. "Caroline's deteriorating condition necessitates additional household management," the entry read. Martha shows concerning traits of independence and curiosity. Fletcher reports finding her in unauthorized areas of the property. Evaluation for compliance procedure recommended before behavior contaminates the household staff further. Schedule for next new moon. Reduced illumination will minimize risk of observation from neighboring properties. The new moon was just 4 days away. Martha now understood she wasn't merely documenting atrocities. She was racing to escape becoming another victim of her uncle's monstrous experiments. That night, she slipped a sleeping draught into her aunt's evening tea, the same one her uncle regularly prescribed, and borrowed the woman's keys. In the estate's office, she located records confirming her worst fears. 36 laborers had undergone what Whitaker termed complete compliance procedures. 12 had died during or shortly after the operations, listed clinically as failed modifications, while the others had been returned to work in their altered state. Most disturbing were the detailed sketches of surgical techniques and a map marking the locations of specimen disposal, a remote section of the property where the pine forest grew densest. As dawn approached, Martha carefully replaced everything and returned to her room, her mind racing. She needed evidence that would compel authorities to act, evidence too compelling to be dismissed or covered up by her uncle's connections. And she needed to act before the new moon. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following afternoon, Dr. Whitaker was called away to attend a Confederate officer who had collapsed while passing through Arlington. With her uncle gone and Fletcher occupied with supervising the field workers, Martha seized her chance. She entered the forbidden infirmary with her aunt's keys, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might alert the house staff. What she found inside would forever shatter her understanding of humanity's capacity for cruelty. 3 rooms had been converted into surgical chambers, each containing specialized equipment that combined medical instruments with bizarre mechanical contraptions. Glass jars lined shelves along one wall, containing what could only be preserved portions of human brains, each meticulously labeled with numbers corresponding to the subjects in her uncle's journal. In the largest room, a man lay strapped to a table, his head immobilized in a metal frame. Though conscious, his eyes held no fear or awareness, only a vacant stare. A portion of his skull had been recently removed and inexpertly replaced, the crude stitches still fresh along his scalp. Martha's hands trembled as she used her aunt's small camera, a recent gift from her northern relatives, to document everything. She knew the photographs would take time to develop, but they would provide irrefutable evidence of the horrors being perpetrated. As she was photographing the final room, which contained cabinets full of surgical records, she heard the unmistakable sound of a carriage approaching. Her uncle had returned earlier than expected. In desperate haste, Martha gathered what evidence she could carry. The most damning journal entries, a small specimen jar with a preserved brain section labeled Seat of Defiance, and the camera with its undeveloped but crucial photographs. She concealed these items in a false bottom she created in her traveling case, then covered them with her personal belongings. That evening at dinner, she forced herself to maintain a facade of normalcy, though every time her uncle's clinical gaze fell upon her, she felt as though he could see through her deception. "You seem preoccupied, Martha," Dr. Whitaker observed, studying her with the same detached interest he showed his subjects. "Are you feeling quite well?" "Just a slight headache, Uncle," she replied, attempting to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps I've been reading too much in poor light." "Indeed," he said with an unsettling smile. "We must take care of that head of yours. Perhaps you should visit me in my study after dinner. I have something that might help." Martha knew then that her time had run out. Her uncle suspected something, and the new moon was still 2 days away. She would have to flee that very night. Under cover of darkness, Martha slipped out of the main house. The cotton fields were eerily silent, moonless night shrouding the estate in perfect blackness. She had left a note for her aunt, though she doubted the perpetually sedated woman would even notice her absence. With her evidence securely hidden in her traveling case and a small amount of money sewn into the lining of her dress, she made her way toward the eastern property line, where the Mercer farm offered her best chance of assistance. What Martha didn't know was that her uncle had already discovered her intrusion into the infirmary. A single misplaced instrument had alerted him to the breach. While she had been carefully maintaining her composure at dinner, Fletcher had been systematically searching her room. "She knows," Fletcher had reported after finding sketches Martha had made of the surgical equipment. "The girl has been documenting everything." Dr. Whitaker's response was chillingly pragmatic. "Prepare the field workers. Find her before she reaches the road. Do try to bring her back unharmed. She's an ideal subject, young, healthy, and with a demonstrable tendency toward problematic independence. The perfect case study for my presentation to the Philadelphia Medical Society. As Martha crossed the fallow field that separated Whitaker land from the Mercer property, she heard the baying of hounds in the distance. Looking back, she saw lanterns moving through the darkness. A search party already dispatched. Her heart pounding, she quickened her pace, the weight of her traveling case growing heavier with each step. When she finally reached the Mercer farmhouse, it was Jacob who answered her frantic knocking, shotgun in hand. "Miss Whitaker?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "What in God's name?" "Please," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming. I have evidence of what your son saw, what my uncle has been doing to those people." Jacob Mercer, despite his initial skepticism of his son's claims, had grown increasingly uneasy about the Whitaker plantation. Too many strange occurrences had accumulated. Looking into Martha's terrified eyes, he made a decision that would forever alter both their lives. "Mary," he called to his wife, "wake Samuel and prepare the wagon. Miss Whitaker, come inside quickly." Within minutes, they could hear the search party approaching. Through the window, Martha saw Fletcher leading at least 10 laborers, all moving with the same vacant mechanical gait that had become the signature of her uncle's procedures. What chilled her most was their expressions. Utterly empty, yet following commands with precise obedience. "They won't stop," she told the Mercers. "They can't. My uncle has removed their ability to resist orders." Samuel, now fully awake, nodded grimly, just like Isaiah, like they ain't even people no more. The Mercers' wagon was ready, but the search party was too close to risk leaving immediately. Jacob made a swift decision, leading Martha to a root cellar hidden beneath their barn floor. "Stay here," he instructed, handing her a small oil lamp. "We'll lead them away, then come back for you." For hours, Martha waited in the damp darkness, clutching her case of evidence. Above, she could hear the muffled sounds of Fletcher questioning the Mercers, the baying of hounds, and the methodical searching of the property. Eventually, the sounds faded as the search moved elsewhere. Just before dawn, Jacob returned alone. "We need to move now," he said grimly. "They've set up checkpoints on the main roads. We'll have to take the old hunting trails through the pine forest." "Where are we going?" Martha asked. "Arlington's not safe. Your uncle has too much influence there. We need to reach Augusta. I have a cousin who works for the newspaper. If your evidence is as damning as you claim, he'll know how to use it." The journey to Augusta was harrowing. Twice they nearly encountered Confederate patrols, and once they spotted a group of Whitaker's altered laborers searching the woods with mechanical precision. It took 3 days of cautious travel, but they finally reached the outskirts of Augusta, where Jacob's cousin, William Mercer, worked as an editor for the Augusta Chronicle. William was initially skeptical of their wild claims, until Martha showed him the evidence. The journal entries detailing the systematic mutilation of human beings in the name of scientific advancement, the preserved brain tissue labeled with clinical detachment. And most damning of all, the photographs she had taken, which William helped develop in the newspaper's darkroom. "This is monstrous," William whispered as the images emerged in the chemical bath. "But who will believe it? In times of war, with the Union at our doorstep, who will care about laborers on a remote plantation?" "Not the Confederate authorities," Martha acknowledged. "But I know people in Philadelphia, my uncle's former colleagues who questioned his methods even before he returned south, and there are Union lines less than 30 miles from here." William's face paled. "You're suggesting reaching out to Northern forces? That's treason, Miss Whitaker. What my uncle has done goes beyond the politics of this war," she replied steadily. "This is about humanity itself." After much debate, William agreed to help Martha compile her evidence into a comprehensive report. He also arranged for a trusted contact to escort her toward Union lines, where she might find justice impossible in the Confederacy. Jacob Mercer returned to his farm to protect his family, knowing the risk he had taken by helping Martha escape. Upon his return, he found his homestead undisturbed but eerily quiet. No sign of his wife or son greeted him, only a note pinned to the door in Dr. Whitaker's precise handwriting. "They are receiving care at my estate. Join us." 2 days later, Martha successfully crossed into Union territory with her evidence. Her report eventually reached medical authorities in Philadelphia, who were horrified by their former colleagues' actions. A special military detail was dispatched to investigate the Whitaker estate as Union forces advanced into Georgia. But when they arrived in October 1864, as Sherman's march cut its path of destruction across the state, they found the Whitaker estate abandoned. The main house stood empty, its contents hastily removed. The infirmary had been burned to the ground, with any remaining evidence reduced to ashes. The laborers' quarters were vacant, with no sign of the 36 who had vanished, or the others who had worked the fields. Most disturbing of all, they discovered a mass grave in the pine forest, exactly where Martha's stolen map had indicated. The remains of 12 individuals were recovered, each bearing the telltale signs of cranial surgery. The others, including the Mercer family, were never found. In the decades that followed, the Whitaker case became a whispered legend in medical circles, an example of science untethered from morality. Records indicate that a physician matching Dr. Whitaker's description established a private asylum in Brazil in 1866, where he continued his work until his death in 1884. His research notes were subsequently purchased by several European medical institutions, though they claimed ignorance of their origins. Martha Whitaker never returned to Georgia. After providing testimony to a special medical ethics committee in Washington, she lived out her days in Boston under an assumed name, working as an advocate for asylum reform. Her nightmares never ceased, the vacant eyes of her uncle's victims haunting her until her death in 1912. The land where the Whitaker estate once stood remained uncultivated for generations, with local farmers claiming the soil had been poisoned. In 1952, when developers finally purchased the property, the discovery of Dr. Whitaker's hidden journal during demolition briefly revived interest in the case. As for the 36 who vanished, and those who were returned to work the fields with altered minds, their names and stories were systematically erased from official records. They exist now only as numbers in a madman's journal and as silent witnesses to humanity's capacity for clinical cruelty. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Whitaker case is not what was discovered, but what remained hidden. As Dr. Heinrich Vogel wrote in his private correspondence years later, Whitaker's error was not his science, which was revolutionary, but his isolation. Had he conducted his work within the proper institutions, it would have been called progress instead of atrocity. When scientific advancement becomes detached from human dignity, the resulting knowledge doesn't illuminate our understanding. It casts longer, darker shadows across our shared humanity.